And why does Justin Fields, why is he out there apologizing? Why are so many of you taking this the wrong way? You should feel happy that we have a player who is as invested, as gutted as the rest of us. And I know, and I love going on Twitter and seeing the talk of hey, I've been rooting for this team. I've been rooting for this team since 52. Don't tell me that Justin Fields, it is his career. I think it means a lot to him. I think that he's the one getting chased down by that Packers defense, being harangued as Sam Mustipher is tossed to the side like I toss my boy away sometimes. Like, I think Justin Fields cares. And the fact that he has to come out and clarify his statements, it's not embarrassing to Justin. It's embarrassing to you. Bears fans, we need to do better. And Sammy, let's start the show.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Adam Ray.
Trying to cut it back. Justin Fields making magic happen. There goes Fields. Touchdown.
The sickest Chicago Bears and fantasy football podcast. Brought to you by Underdog Fantasy and Air Pura. Sports entertainment like no other. It's gonna be sick.
Welcome to the Sick Podcast. It's me, Adam Rank, and we've got a great show lined up for you today. It's week 3 of the NFL season. The Bears are going to be taking on the Houston Texans. We have the voice of the Houston Texans. Mark Vandermeer is going to be joining us, and of course, Jason Braddock will be joining us also later on in the show. He's also a fantasy enthusiast, so when we do this, we're going to have two different voices for the Houston Texans, but also do a little bit of fantasy. So don't worry about that. We're going to be all good. We're going to be all set up. And it's an interesting game because, of course, Lovie Smith will be returning to Soldier Field for the second time as an opposing head coach. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're really excited for this game, an opportunity for the Bears to get right once again, not to diminish. I mean, I have a lot of respect for this Houston team, but an opportunity for the Bears, a team that's 1-1. You open the season with the San Francisco 49ers, who were in the NFC Championship game last year, the Green Bay Packers, who were the number 1 seed. So I think coming through that stretch at 1-1, even the most optimistic of Bears fans, which I would consider myself one of, said, listen, if we're 1-1 heading into the Houston game, which should be a competitive matchup, I think we should feel pretty good about ourselves. And you know what else I feel pretty good about? Oh, the air quality in my house. Now, you might not be aware of this, but I live in Southern California where we're ravaged by wildfires, pollution. COVID cases are on the rise because the kids are back in school. And so what I did is I decided that I wanted to protect my family. I wanted to clean the air in this household, and I got an air purifier, and I got one from Air Pura. Oh, I could not have made a better selection. This thing has done wonders. My family breathing easier every night, and it's quiet. You wouldn't even know it was there. It just looks like modern decor. Like, it just looks like a cool piece. Like, I went out there and I purchased an R5D4. Thanks to every Star Wars fan who, by the way, corrected me last week. I get it. But listen, if you want to clean the air in your house, I suggest you go and check out Air Pura, a new sponsor here at the Sick Podcast. And we are so fortunate to have them on board. We're also fortunate to be joined today with one of the great voices around the NFL. We have a guy who has been the voice of the Houston Texans since their inception. So when David Carr was out there leading the Houston Texans to a victory in their very first game against the Dallas Cowboys, he was on the call, and he can remember every single moment of the last, what has it been? Like 90 years? I don't know what it is, but listen, it's time for Rank's Rival. We got a great one today. And please, without further ado, welcome Mark Vandermeer. We are so excited. We are so honored to have you aboard. Thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Adam. Really looking forward to this one. And yeah, I guess I'm the rival. These two teams don't meet that much, It's always special.
There's no heat. There's legitimate. Everybody still loves Lovie Smith. David Carr is a friend of mine, so I have no heat with Houston. It's a lovely city. We talked before the show. I thought an underrated Super Bowl host city. What did you think?
Oh, the Texans, well, Houston, but the Texans were part of the Super Bowl committee. Did a really nice job with the last one following the 2016 season. I think the one following the 2003 season was pretty good as well. And Tom Brady won both those games, which is kind of weird. Notable. I guess he's won a lot of games, so a lot of Super Bowl cities can say that. There was another Super Bowl in Houston, 1973. Oh, it was Miami and Minnesota at Rice Stadium. It's kind of a forgotten Super Bowl site. But yeah, Houston hosted a Super Bowl back then outdoors. Rice Stadium held 70,000 people. They've only recently reconfigured that to have a smaller crowd.
Oh my gosh, the Houston football history. It's so rich and it's great. You know, and it is I love the city of Houston. I love the history, you know, everything that happened with the Oilers. That's always gutting to me. And so I am glad to see the Texans back. And I think the team is starting to come along. You know, I mentioned this at the top of the show. A lot of Bears fans, you know, and this is I think this is a casual take where you look at the Texans, you're like, well, that should be a win. But this team looks like they're really starting to put something together.
Yeah, defensively, Adam, that's where it's at for the Houston Texans. And even though it's Lovie Smith's first year as a head coach here, he was the defensive coordinator last year. So I think what you're looking at is year 2 in the Lovie defensive program with a lot of returning talent, but they've added a lot of faces that are making a difference. Rasheem Green, Jerry Hughes, these guys are making plays. They've got the rookies on the back end with Derek Stingley Jr. and Jalen Petrie. So that side of the ball, they're really competitive. First 2 games, coulda, woulda, shoulda won those games, right? A lot of teams say that in this league. Couldn't close out in the fourth quarter. It's offensively where they're really challenged right now, need to improve quickly.
Yeah, how good has Stingley been playing? Because I know there was a chance they could have gone with Sauce Gardner as well. They went with Stingley. How's that pick been working out?
I think Stingley's been playing well. You know, he missed a little bit of chunk of time in the training camp period, but he's come on strong. Sutton had over 100 yards receiving against him last week for Denver. And people are talking about that. Oh my gosh, the rookie. Yeah. Listen, that's a veteran receiver. They put him on an island with Sutton. Russell Wilson's no dummy. I'm going to try it. He tried it. It worked pretty well for them. But at the end of the day, you look at the scoreboard, it's 16 points for the Broncos in their home gym with Russell Wilson. You'll take that every single time. I don't care what team, who you are. You hold them to 16, you expect to win. They only scored 9, they lose.
Yeah, that's one of the things we're talking about, mirrored franchises, because Kyler Gordon was picked on by Aaron Rodgers on Sunday Night Football. And the Bears fans are the same way. They're like, what's wrong with this guy? You're like, well, he's going up against the Hall of Famer, being left on a – like these things are going to happen, I think, with both Stingley and Kyler Gordon. This will be an instance where we look back on 5 years from now and be like, remember when these guys used to be picked on and now nobody wants to look in their direction? You mentioned the offense, and – Davis Mills is a quarterback that I have always kind of liked. You know, I'm out here on the West Coast. I always like Stanford quarterbacks. I thought Kevin Hogan was going to transition to be a solid pro, but unfortunately that didn't work out. But I was optimistic about Davis Mills. What have we seen? I know that you said, you know, scoring 9 points against Denver isn't great, but I think that he's starting to really develop into a nice passer.
Well, they really liked the way he finished off last season. You know, he got thrust into the lineup way too early in week 2 last year, sat for a while after appearing in a few games, about 6 starts. Tyrod Taylor came back. Then they put Mills back in, and he plays well down the stretch. They beat the Chargers at home. They beat the Jags. They had pretty solid games against the 49ers. Last year, though. This year, what you're seeing, he only threw for 50% completions against the Broncos, and that's got to be better. He's the first one to tell you that. And on opening weekend, had 2 touchdown passes to O.J. Howard. They had a 20-3 lead to the Colts, but they blew that. Look, he's on the rise still. He's got to get better. He's still going like this. He's still improving, but it's got to happen fast because this is a very big year for the Texans with that position. If Mills doesn't establish himself as the guy of the future, maybe the present, but at least, hey, this is going to be our guy moving forward, then they have to set themselves up to draft a quarterback in 2023. They have 2 first-round picks in 2023 and 2 first-round picks in 2024, thanks to the Watson deal. So that's good, but you'd prefer not use them on a quarterback, so Mills has to fill that gap. Now, so far, it's been okay, but you got to see more. You're not 0-2, you're 0-1-1, and you're looking for a win this weekend.
Yeah, you didn't open with 2 losses, so you got to look at the bright side of that. And I was looking at it this morning. Since week 14 of last season, his passer ratings up around 100. His touchdown to interception ratio is actually really good. So there's a lot of positives. Do you feel like, and we're going through this in Chicago where people are like, well, the quarterback issue, it's there. We got to look at it for a quarterback. But both these guys were drafted in the same class. Of course, Davis was drafted in the 3rd round. You mentioned that you have 2 draft picks in 2024. Doesn't it just make sense that Davis should be given this entire season and maybe move this decision down to 2024?
Yeah, and I think he will be given the entire season unless it's a complete flame out. And I don't expect that at all from Mills. No. Mills is a really talented guy, and he should be able to get results. And they're running the ball better than they did last year. Damien Pierce, this rookie from Florida, looks pretty good so far. You'll see plenty of him Sunday at Soldier Field. I just think, look, they have to be able to give Mills the runway to get better. And I feel the same way about all these quarterbacks from the class of 2021, Fields included. You got to give these guys time. Nobody has any patience anymore. Everybody expects Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Watson or somebody like that to just burst out of the gate. Look at Josh Allen. Look, Josh Allen right away. It was looking okay, but is it really going to work out? But what did they do, Adam? And, David Carr will be the first one to tell you this. Everyone's got to get better. You always have to get better, no matter what the position is, but especially at the quarterback position. You have to continue to rise. And if you don't, well, it's going to be a different situation. You'll be a backup or whatever happens.
Yeah, that's always, that's the run of every quarterback. And a lot of it comes down to, like you said, running the football, the offensive line. Now, Damien Pierce is of special interest to me because I've drafted him in all my fantasy leagues. Rex Burkhead, but what happened in week 1? Because all of a sudden you guys are up 20-3. And you're like, this is the time when we should see Damien Pierce. It was Rex Burkhead. You mentioned it a second ago. We're expecting to see a lot of him at Soldier Field. Do you imagine, selfishly, that Damien Pierce is going to be the bell cow running back of this offense at some point?
He has to be. There's nowhere else to go. Look, they love having Rex Burkhead on the team, and he's the kind of guy you want on your team. 10-year vet, does everything right. Great example for the younger players. Real solid in pass protection. But opening weekend, he has 14 carries. Pierce has 11. Lovie Smith wasn't too happy about that. He publicly said it. So the next week, Pierce has 15, and Rex is still in the game in 3rd down situations and stuff like that. But I think Pierce needs even more touches. They threw him the ball. He had a catch. First play of the game, they tried to throw him the ball. It was incomplete because it was a blown-up play. They need to find ways to get him the ball in space. He's a punishing runner. He will make the defense feel it. And one thing I don't like is that it just doesn't seem to be that deep a group. I mean, they're solid, but they're not deep. And I guess it's a lot to ask for in this league. They don't have the depth of even the Bears, let's say, at the running back position. So it's something they're going to work on as Nick Caserio continues to develop the roster.
Yeah, I thought it was a great pick. We saw him. He was in a timeshare committee at Florida, still ended up with 16 touchdowns. So I still hope that translates after week 3, obviously. How's the offensive line coming along? I know that's always been something like, listen, you hang out with David Carr long enough, the offensive line is going to be mentioned. How's it coming in Houston?
Yeah, and in David's defense here, the plan for him was Baselli at left tackle and Ryan Young at right tackle, and we're going to be great on the offensive line. Never mind good. And it'll help the rookie quarterback. We're going to smash the ball with the ground game. And that defense was good. David will be the first to tell you that, too. Yeah. They beat Pittsburgh his rookie year with 3 defensive touchdowns and only 47 total yards of offense. I think that's still an NFL record, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, you do need the line. This line with Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, that's good. Titus Howard at right tackle. He's had some moments, but it's year 4. And unfortunately for him, he's been moved around a lot throughout his career. He needs to stay at right tackle, his natural position. They just lost Justin Britt for a while, and I don't know how long that's going to be, but he's on the non-football reserve list. And, I do believe Kenyon Green, this rookie from Texas A&M, is going to be one to watch. He's a people mover. He's a rookie, though. A lot of these guys, you've talked to a lot of these linemen. Sometimes they tell you, it took me 2-3 years to figure it out. 2 or 3 years? I need it Sunday. But
we want it now.
Their point is valid, that's a really nuanced thing. Even though it's a brutal position, there are a lot of nuances to playing it. They got to get good.
Yeah, again, the Bears, these mirrored franchises going through it with some rookie players as well. Tevin Jenkins, they put in at right guard. He's looked really good. And at some point, you got to just let him go and let him go out there and do the thing. And the guy you were talking about, I remember him coming through the draft process. really, really high opinion of him. So I like the future of the Texans. I think there's a lot of good things. And you know what? Again, you look at this squad and you look at the wide receivers. Brandon Cooks has been one of the best receivers in the NFL for quite some time. He gets traded for first-round picks. DeAndre Hopkins does not, but Brandon Cooks does. And then you have this Nico Collins, who's fantastic. I think, listen, I don't want it to happen this week, but it feels like this Texans team can pop at some point.
Yeah, they need to erupt on that side of the football. I don't know if it's this week either, but they got to find a way to have some sort of, I don't want to call it a stats game. I mean, that's an NBA term, but they need to, just stretch their legs. They need to play like an FCS opponent. Just get going here, and it doesn't exist in the NFL. I think it's really fascinating about this league that it's hard to improve, everything's so scrutinized. Training camp, you're literally practicing in public. Like, can I just get some privacy to make some mistakes here while I'm learning my craft? But it doesn't happen in this league. Everything's so public. Everything's in a fishbowl. And they'll find a way, I think, to get a lot better in the passing game because they need to. There's nowhere to go but up after a 50% completion performance. Opening week, like I said, they did better. But Nico looks good in year 2, third-round draft choice from Michigan. You mentioned Cooks, probably the most underappreciated receiver in this league. He's a 1,000-yard machine. He got traded for a 1 twice and then a 2. That's amazing. You just don't see that. So he's done this with so many different teams. 8,000-yard player. It's really interesting to follow his career.
Yeah, I always feel like, and again, this stems from fantasy football, but like having to convince people that Brandon Cooks is good. I'm like, I don't know why I have to do this. Like the resume speaks for himself. And it feels like this team, again, like looking at this, and I remember going over this during the summer. I'm like, gosh, they're so close. It feels so close. The division seems up for grabs. You're 0-1-1, and yet you're a game out of first place. Like, how does it feel? Like, how do the Texans, how do they feel? I know, and by the way, I appreciate you when you're talking about FCS opponent and saying that there's none. I know you, listen, if it wasn't me, you would probably make the joke that it's the Bears. And I appreciate you not doing, no. I appreciate you not doing that. No. You're a nice person.
Adam, I have learned the hard way in this league not to underestimate, overestimate anybody, any opponent in this league. We see it every weekend. We see weird stuff happening. Look at the Jags and the Colts last week.
Right.
I thought maybe the Jags could possibly win because they always seem to beat the Colts in North Florida.
Since 2014,
by that score, are you kidding me? 5 sacks on Ryan and the 3 picks after what the Texans did to him. I thought the Colts would have their house in order. Like, let's run Jonathan Taylor. Let's get it together here against Jacksonville. And then they're terrible against Jacksonville. I don't know where they're going, but they always seem to start out slow. But the division is a fascinating division to me because last year was the first year in a while where they didn't get 2 playoff teams into the field. And usually the AFC South was doing that. Better than advertised division. I've been carrying the flag for this thing because the Texans playing it. Like, if you put, the NFC East logos in the AFC South, we'd have a lot of notoriety. But the problem is no Super Bowls. That tends to be important, But you had 3 teams over a 6-year period make the AFC Championship game, and none of them were the Texans, yet the Texans won 6 out of 9 division titles. It's weird stuff to follow, and the division being weak in 15 and 16 enabled the Texans to jump out on top and win the division with 9-7 records. That might happen again this year. Obviously, you can't do 9-7 in the 17-game schedule, but maybe 9-7-1 or something.
Well, you guys have a leg. You guys have a leg up going 9-7-1.
Long way to go.
Long way to go. What about Lovie, though? I'll finish it off with this. What does this game mean to Lovie Smith? I know that he's played the Bears twice before, once here, once in Tampa Bay. Has he given any sense like this game kind of means a lot? Do the players pick up on that? Do the players even know that he coached in Chicago? I figure they all grew up knowing him as the coach of the Bears. What's been the feeling like around Lovie this week?
Listen, around players, don't you have to be careful with whatever references you have that are more than 10 years ago? I mean, let's be honest here. My co-host on the evening shows, John Harris, threw hey, did you watch The Last Dance with Michael Jordan on one of the players? I said, listen, Jordan's last finals was before this guy was born, okay? Let's remember that. That's like talking to me about, George Mikan. How is that George Mikan appearance with the Minnesota Lakers or whatever? I mean, come on. Yeah. So these guys, they do know this. They know it intellectually. Maybe they remember something as a kid, but they don't really understand the full magnitude of what Lovie did in Chicago. They can look back and research it. Lovie has not been very specific at all about this one means something to me. Now, maybe he was behind closed doors. I actually did on his show a whole traveling Texans thing, things to do in Chicago. Lovie, you know Chicago better than anybody. Should they take a river cruise? Should they take a gangster tour? We were talking about Wrigley Field. Now, one of the nice stories is Lovie and Dusty Baker being here in this town.
Yeah.
As black head coaches of, Dusty, obviously a manager, but of their teams, and also Paul Silas with the Rockets. Those three posed for a really nice photo above a building in downtown Houston. It was really cool. Very great image of diversity in this city with the head men of these franchises. Very cool moment. And Lovie speaks so highly of Dusty. Obviously, they have a background in Chicago. And we did talk to him about Wrigley Field a bit. That was fun.
That's amazing. I don't want to be disappointed because I know that you probably asked him his favorite deep dish. I don't want to know. And
he said deep dish. He didn't say a specific place.
Good for him. Okay.
Yeah, he's politically savvy that way.
So
he's
smart.
Like, I'm not going to mention one.
He's
place.
so smart. He's so smart.
Yes.
This is why we love Lovie Smith, and it's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be a fun one. And how do you see it? I'll ask. I know Jason's waiting, by the way. But listen, Jason, hold on. I got Mark Vandermeer on. This is not every day that I get a great occurrence like this.
Jason will have some good thoughts. He's at practice a lot, so Jason knows his Texan stuff. I don't know if he knows deep dish pizza or not, but this game I'll be anybody who gets to 20 wins this game, right? I mean, is that your feeling?
We might be here a long time waiting for that.
This is 17-16 kind of stuff here, unless somebody erupts, and maybe it could happen. You could see the Bears going nuts and Fields making plays, running free, and maybe hitting a deep ball or two, and that's it. And the Texans played pretty good D, but you can't stop the big play for some reason. Or the other way around. Maybe Houston finally finds a way to run the ball a bit. Defense clamps down, get a turnover or two. It's going to be the old close game, turnovers, field position, meat and potatoes football in Chicago.
Football the way it's meant to be played, and I can't wait for it. It's going to be a great one. Great to see Lovie Smith on the sideline as well. But listen, Mark, thank you so much for being here. Again, it's a tremendous accomplishment for you to be able to call every game of the Houston Texans franchise. At some point, hopefully we can catch up. I want to have a beer with you or just the beverage of your choice. I want to talk about some of these Houston games because they've had a great history there, not just with the Oilers, but of course with the Texans. But thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on, Adam. I really enjoy your work, and I really appreciate being on today. Looking forward to it.
Well, the pleasure was all on this side of the microphone. Thank you very much. And there he goes, the great Mark Vandermeer. And listen, of top, play-by-play guys in the NFL. Now that he's gone, I'm gonna tell him this. Now, I didn't want to embarrass him, but for me, like when you talk about voices of the NFL, like everybody knows I'm a Matt Money Smith guy, and of course we love Jeff Joniak. Mark's up there with me. Like he's part of that crew, an absolute delight. And of course, again, with my friendship with David Carr, we talked about it. I'm like, hey, this guy seems cool, and then he was, and so it turned out to be very good for me. Enjoyed that conversation. By the way, want to thank everybody who is listening in on WCKG AM 1530, the Chicago home of the Sick Podcast. That's right. Every Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central, you can catch the Sick Podcast on AM 1530, WCKG, and it is part of a 2-hour cover 2 of Bears coverage because following us, it's Olin Kreutz, who is nominated for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and Jason McKee, a cover 2 here on WCKG. We cannot thank them enough for having us. The partnership has been going tremendously. And by the way, let me just say that about Olin Kreutz. Love seeing the Bears who are part of this finalist group that includes Devin Hester. It includes Olin Kreutz. Obviously, Lance Briggs is part of it, and I think I'm forgetting somebody else, which is very professional of me, but it's very nice. We're hopeful that everybody gets in. But can we just be honest and say if Devin Hester does not get in, there is something incredibly wrong with this process. When I'm thinking of the class, and I know Jared Allen's in there, but did they finally put in Zach Thomas? I don't know. That's a weird one that needs to be rectified at some point. But Devin needs to go in. Patrick Willis needs to go in. Chris Johnson is a first-time nominee. I don't know if he'll get in on the first time, but I think that he should be. I mean, once you let Jerome Bettis in, you're like, well, now you got to let everybody in. Like it's, when you go around and you're inviting kids to your children's birthday parties. Like once there's like a bar, like once you've stepped over a bar, so to speak, then it's like, well, now everybody's here. But in any event, listen, we could talk about that at great length at some other point. I have a friend of mine, a Twitter friend of mine, because I enjoy his work, because we're going to have a treat here in a moment. He is, again, this is the one of the things about the Houston Texans. And again, I'm telling Bears fans, number one, do not sleep on this Texans team. Do not sleep on them as a franchise. This is a good organization, so I need you guys to chill out and not just disregard them like there's some afterthought. And the cool thing about Houston is that they've got great radio voices. And joining us right now, it is time once again, though. Let's do it. Let's do Ranks Rivals Part 2. And if you are in the Houston area, you know this next guest. His name is Jason Braddock. And let's just bring him on. Let's bring him on because he's awesome. There he is. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Enjoying listening to you and Mark. Quick story, if you don't mind, Adam.
Please. Oh, my God. I love it.
Back in 2006, moved back to Houston from Denver. First time I ever listened to Sports Talk Radio, 2006. Mark Vandermeer, Andre Ware morning show. Got hooked immediately. And a couple of years later, I said, man, that's got to be a wonderful life. Talk about sports for a living, let your passion go out, meet wonderful people. And so I decided, and that's one of the reasons, and I've told Mark and Andre this before, but that's one of the reasons I decided to get in sports talk. I'm a high school graduate. Back in 2009, after my fourth child, I said, I want to work in Houston Sports Talk Radio. And then I just started grinding until I got there.
Yeah, and you're one of the co-hosts of the Houston Football Show. You've made some stops around the radio dial there in Houston. How's the show been going?
Oh, it is awesome. Every Tuesday, myself and Pro Football Network's NFL insider, Aaron Wilson, also here locally, Texans insider for KPRC2 and Sports Talk 790. So my background, back in 2009, I took a football GM and scouting course under Russ Landay, former scout, and John Wooten, and started studying the valuation process of it. Obviously went into writing with Roto Experts and different fantasy sites back at that time. And then started finally getting into sports talk radio. So with this Houston Football Show, it's year-round, once a week, insider show where you blend scouting, analytics, and inside information, 8 p.m. Central Time, once a week, every Tuesday night. We're loving it, and every week just gets better and better, and we want to just continue to grow it. Let me ask you something, Adam. You were here in for the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl in Houston, right?
Yeah, Mark and I were talking about that. I said that Houston, and I'll repeat it again. Houston, one of the more underrated Super Bowl host cities, because I loved it. I had a great time in Houston.
This is probably going to blow your mind because I seriously doubt you remember this. I was leaving Radio Row at George R. Brown Convention Center, walking over for media night. And who do I see? I'm like, that dude looks like Adam Rank. So I introduced myself. We had a short talk. I doubt you remember it, but it's crazy to come back full circle.
Was it Tuesday night or was it Friday night?
I believe, I can't remember. My recall's horrible. I'm not Mark Vandermeer. Mark's like, do you remember that punt block in 2005? I'm like, no, I don't remember last week's game unless I go look at the film.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I do believe, though, it was Friday night.
Okay.
It was I think I had just picked up because it was in the media lounge, because at the convention center they have a media lounge, and you can and there was a guy named Nick who worked for the Houston radio station and the ESPN station. And I think I was with Nick because I went back to go get a magnet, and I remember meeting you, and because you're also a fantasy person too. So that always stands out to me. So I think that we talked, I know that we talked a little bit of fantasy too. And I think if I'm remembering this correctly, we did talk about Houston as a host city, because I started glowing about it right around Thursday or Friday. This is actually like a really cool place. We went to the Eighth Wonder Brewery, the downtown area. I don't know if the downtown area has continued to grow. I know there was a lot of construction going on. But it was really cool. It's a cool vibe. It reminded me a little bit, like anytime you have something going on in a downtown area and it's being rebuilt, it always reminds me of San Diego. and the way they've redone their thing. But let's talk about a rebuilding football franchise.
Sure.
What's the vibe of this Texans team? Because a moment ago, I've been imploring everybody. This isn't like the challenge, and this is a layup. You're going up against Veronica in one of the gauntlet events. Like this is a tough team. What's the vibe of this Houston Texans squad?
Well, I'll tell you this. Over the last couple of years, the Texans were right there as, some were saying the laughingstock of the NFL with all the news. You and Mark were talking about the DeAndre Hopkins trade briefly, everything that went on the last couple of years. I was blown away when I got to camp this year and the complete 180. It feels like the stress is off the back. It feels like the weight's gone. Guys typically seem to enjoy being around each other, enjoy being in the facilities. And as well as I do. Now, the fans there, X's and O's, what's happening on the field, production, all that, but there's a human element to the game. And in Houston, that hasn't been great. The atmosphere hasn't been great the last couple of years. From the top down of the organization, from Cal McNair and his wife, Hannah, to Nick Caserio, to Lovie Smith, Pat Pamela, seems like there's finally buy-in. And they've been underdogs, 8.5 to the Colts, 10 points to the Broncos, and they've been in those games. And they should have won those games, actually, up 29-9, plus 20 through the first three quarters, week 1 and week 2. Fourth quarter, outscored 27-0. So there's something happening there in the fourth quarter. There's a lot to do with it. Davis Mills does have to wear a heavy part of that burden. And in the fourth quarter, he's just a different guy this year. But it is a completely different team. The defense is top 10 in red zone, goal-to-go, points, third down percent. But outside of that, you'll see little new nuances of the game that it's just puzzling. Like if you go back and watch Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon last week, it was all contained. The Texans rotate 5 D tackles in, and they were plugged in the middle. But when you plug something, it's going to squirt out somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So when these Broncos backs were kicking it outside, there was nobody there. Either the linebackers weren't filling or guys were getting out of the position. There wasn't setting the edge for the majority of it. And that's something you have to do against David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, who I was a huge fan of. Like I said, I've been evaluating for years. He was my number 2 running back in the entire draft last year.
Oh, he was.
He's most instinctual runner in that draft. We saw what he could do when he stepped up last year when Montgomery went down. If Montgomery ever goes down, Khalil Herbert's a household name.
Yeah, I think the Bears intend to run them as a tandem. They come in using that Green Bay system, and it's a work in progress. And I think at some point they would love to have them as their version of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon and use them. That I know they're all 4 of them are different. But, in a variety of ways where you use that 2-pronged approach, especially when you're trying to rebuild your wide receiver room, which the Bears are certainly trying to do. But you talked about Davis Mills because this has been an issue, obviously, in Chicago. We traded up. We drafted Justin Fields with the 11th overall selection. People are already like, well, we're done. Like he lost 1 game in Green Bay. Now it's over, which is ridiculous. Like it's a terrible situation. I don't agree with it. I think that Justin Fields is going to end up I think he's going to be a good quarterback. He's the quarterback that I wanted. So I'm not even sweating it. What is the vibe like? I'm using vibe too much, but what is the feeling like in Houston with Davis Mills? You might have heard Mark and I talk about it. I really liked him coming out of Stanford,
right?
But he's a 3rd round pick. He doesn't get as much consideration as a guy that you traded up for in the 1st round. What is the feeling around Davis Mills?
Well, I think that's a tricky question if we talk about what's the feeling in the city. In the building, they like him. There's obviously areas has to improve in. He's been sacked 5 times in the fourth quarter and overtime this year. First through third quarter through 2 games, only sacked 3 times. He's holding the ball long. He's second guessing himself. He's got a little bunny hop when he jumps. And so week 1 got blindsided, fumble, was shook after that in the fourth quarter. Week 2 took another shot, another fumble. They recovered it as well on that one, though. And so Davis Mills in the fourth quarter has to develop because he's completing 31% of his passes in the fourth quarter this year. That is insane. And he hasn't played great on the road. 4 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on the road in his career. Insanely, 14 touchdowns, 1 interceptions at home. And the key with Davis Mills is that the lack of experience. That's why he lasted to the 3rd round. It wasn't talent. I had a high 2nd round grade on him. Back to Justin Fields, I had them 1, 2, 3 quarterbacks in the draft. I had Trevor slightly ahead of Zach Wilson, and then Zach slightly ahead of Justin Fields. Liked all three of the guys. And then Trey Lance, I had a late first on. Mac, I had a mid-second on. I didn't think Mac was a first-round pick. But I love Fields. I'm right there with you. He's struggling early. You don't have any weapons around him. It's similar to early in Colin Kaepernick's career with the 49ers. He had absolutely no wide receivers. And he's out there and they're running RPOs, zone reads, different things to kind of manipulate the coverages. And he's making them pay like the Packers in the playoff game when they took off for an incredible run. But he has no weapons. And I think that's the reason why the Texans have a shot to go on the road and win this game is because these teams, you said something to Mark that I thought hit the nail right on the head. These teams are very parallel. And not only the quarterback position, just so many different areas. Probably the biggest difference, though, is what the Texans defense is doing in top 10 in certain areas. The bend, don't break. You know Lovie Smith's defense. They're going to tighten up once you get down there in the red zone. That's who they are. Things haven't changed. He's going to have a lot of D-line, a lot of linebackers, rotate them, keep them fresh, and really try to focus on stopping the running game. What's hurt them the first 2 weeks is that they haven't been able to stop the run, especially on outside contain, and they haven't been able to stop the opposing number one wide receiver. Pittman went for like 120 yards. Cortland Sutton went for 120 yards. Problem with Chicago is, no disrespect meant here, but you don't have a number one wide receiver.
Whoa, hey, whoa, hey, listen. I was fully prepared to come up here and be very complimentary. You heard me talking about it with Mark. I love Brandon Cooks. I think Nico Collins is a great receiver, a budding superstar, perhaps, in the NFL. Darnell Mooney's a good player.
Okay, all right. He's not even your top producer through 2 weeks. It's Equanimeous St. Brown, and then your second most involved is David Montgomery. And so the situation here,
we've had trouble getting him the football so far. That I will concede, but I think talent wise, that I think he's awesome.
Well, here's the thing. This week, and again, back to the parallel, especially with the quarterback position, Trey Lance is out, Dak Prescott's out. So out of active quarterbacks that are playing this week, the two lowest are playing in this game in completion percent below expected completion percent. Justin Fields is minus 11%. Davis Mills minus 10. Give or take some fractions there. But these are two of the guys that have missed on passes they should be completing at 11 and 10%. Two of, as far as active quarterbacks, the two worst in the league right now on the accuracy. And going back to the Bears passing game, you know this as well as I do. Fields 120 yards, one passing game, 51 came on one play. He only had 70 yards the whole rest of it. Almost 50% of his yards came on one play. The second week, 70 passing yards, 30 came on one play. Rest of the game, if 50 to 60% of your production, 30-40% of your production is coming on one play in your passing attack, and you've got 190 passing yard attacks through 2 weeks, you don't have a passing game. He's got 7 and 8 completions in those 2 games. That's what's been the Texans' Achilles heel, stopping opposing number one like Sutton and Pittman and peeling the curtain back a little bit because like what Lovie said yesterday, Derek Stingley is his number one. Steven Nelson is the number 2. And he kind of contradicts himself because last week he says the Texans are worried about winning this year over the development, all that. Well, if you put Steven Nelson the way he's played this year on Cortland Sutton in that game, again, you said the rookies are going to go develop. I agree with it. I got a daughter Derek Stingley's age. So I understand they're young, they're going to develop and everything. That being said, if Stingley's primary responsibility isn't Sutton and it's Steven Nelson's, Texans win that game. It's not a question. Yeah. There's not a question. So there's been some questionable decisions. I heard you and Mark talking about the Damien Pierce usage and everything. But I think the Texans have an advantage here because of the Bears' lack of efficiency in the passing game.
No, that's fair. And that is, one of the things I've been saying over the last couple of days is that, and this is, again, it's not a knock on the Texans. I don't think of them as a layup. I don't think of it as an FCS type of situation or anything like that. There's a healthy respect for the Houston Texans. But when you start off with the San Francisco 49ers in a game in a downpour, you go on the road to Green Bay in prime time, which, okay, thanks, NFL. Let's get that out of the way at least now so we can move forward. If things, and again, I'm not saying that Justin Fields has to go out and throw for 514 yards. but at least be competent. At least be. And I thought too, when you started looking at some of the all 22s, you're like, I actually felt a lot better about Luke Getsy, about like, okay, I see what he's doing. Justin needs to step up. And really, you know what? I think that's a fair statement. I think that's a fair criticism. And I think that's probably true of both quarterbacks in this contest of like, hey, listen, guys, like it's up to you. Like I think like Davis, like you've got good receivers. You have to trust them. You know, you can't throw everything to OJ Howard. I knew he'd throw 2 passes to OJ Howard the first week, but 2 good ones. But you know, you got to start trusting your guys because you have good ones. And similarly, like even though you don't have necessarily household names, Justin, you got to go out there and you got to make some plays. So it'll be interesting. Normally I would do a thing where we do picks. I think we both know we're both like, I think we're both complimentary. There's no heat here or anything like that. But I got to ask you, Jason, because I know that you are a fantasy guy, and I purposely left an extra ticket to Fantasy Isle. And I'm asking, would you like to join me on Fantasy Island?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right.
I would. You got 2
Sammy,
tickets to paradise. Let's go.
We got it. Sammy, roll the animation. Let's go to the island.
Welcome to our Fantasy Island.
And joining us now on Fantasy Island. No, Jason, I'm just kidding. But you're a writer for drroto.com. Tell us a little bit about that site.
Dr. Roto's a friend. The first podcast I ever did was 11 years ago with Dr. Roto. We were both at Mark Cardano, part of Sports Grid now, owned this little football site when I first started getting in the industry called Extra Point Football. They were bought out by Roto Experts. And so we did stuff on Sirius XMs, but it all started with me and him doing our first podcast 11 years ago called Fantasy to Reality. And this is what he really pulled me into the fantasy industry because he would run the 1 chair. I would do the 2 chair. He would lay it out. I would break down the X's and O, and he would give the fantasy spin to it. And again, this was over a decade ago. And so we really enjoyed the chemistry, and he's just a great dude. He was on Sirius XM for years, and actually one of his listeners saved his life. He had to get a transplant, and without that transplant, Doc wouldn't be here today. Listener donated. Forgive me. My recall's horrible. As I said, I can't remember which body part, but the listener gave him the transplant, saved Doc's life. And Doc is just one of the most genuinely authentic, good guys around. Runs drroto.com, a great site over there. I have to write my wide receiver versus cornerback article later today. Gave my first look at DFS week 3 for the DraftKings slate. So yeah, just a lot of great talent over there. Chris Kennedy. When I was at Roto Expert, I worked with Jake Seeley and Pat Mayo, and you could just see these guys' work ethic and knowledge. Chris Kennedy's the next Pat Mayo and Jake Seeley. The guys' work ethic. And if you're a golf guy and you find yourself up there in Martha's Vineyard, he's also a GM of one of the golf courses up there. So you have to hit him up, Adam.
Well, I'll have to hit him up. And yeah, Pat Mayo, one of the great guys, love going on with Patty Mayo. Although I can't remember the last time I talked fantasy with him because we're always talking MTV Real World Challenge. But talking about fantasy, nice. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, though, that Underdog Fantasy is the easiest way to play fantasy sports. It's simple to get started. Just head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app, sign in using the promo code SICK, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Like, listen, if you're sitting there, you're bummed out this season because you drafted CeeDee Lamb or Kyle Pitts or maybe both of them, and you're like, I need to start over. Well, you go over to Underdog Fantasy, download that app right now. And again, just use the code SICK. And it's not just, there's so many games. You will be enthralled. You'll probably end up, you know what, not spending a lot of time at work. You'll be so enthused. So check out our friends at Underdog Fantasy, one of the best sites out there. I implore you. So
Adam, can I jump on the Underdog real quick?
Please do.
Oh my gosh, the best ball drafts, the format, everything on that's one of the best. Last year I spent so much just doing it. It's addictive. Those best ball drafts, everyone loves drafting. If you like seasonal, you love drafting. This kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Went over there and I did so many best ball drafts, and it's a great format they use as well.
No, 100%. If you're not familiar with best ball drafting, it is really an addictive way to play fantasy football. And I am at some point will probably move exclusively to best ball. And that's pretty much like whenever somebody ask me to do these leagues. Not we do pros versus Joes. We do the Scott Fishbowl, a lot of those big ones. But normally when people are like, hey, we're raising money, I'm like, okay, either you get a donation or make it best ball. And if it's on Underdog, it's even better. And there's a lot. So again, like, listen, you'll get a deposit doubled. So go in there and try it out. What do you got to lose? But $100, but Underdog's going to double it for you. So you're going to be just fine. Just use that promo code SICK. I do want to talk though. We'll talk about Damien Pierce and everything like that. I think that if I remember this correctly, did you recently tweet out about who is it? Isaiah Likely of the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, you're on board with him, right?
Dude, I didn't evaluate him, so I got a late start on draft evaluate. Peel the curtain back a little bit. I took the last year off to kind of work on myself. I know it sounds cliche and corny, but sometimes we have to do that to just keep developing as human. And so I got a late start on the draft process, really late. I didn't watch Isaiah Likely. I watched him in the preseason. I'm like, who is this kid? I'm originally from South Carolina. He went to Coastal Carolina. So I love pulling for Houston kids and South Carolina kids. So it's not from South Carolina, went to Coastal. So it intrigued me. Then I watched him. I'm like, this kid is legit. And if the Ravens draft a tight end, there's a 90% chance he's going to be a stud. But this guy, and especially with the limitation on the wide receiver depth. Now, I love Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman, probably the closest thing to Chad Johnson route running coming out of the draft. Love Rashad Bateman. And when you have a mobile quarterback and something Chicago has on their side with Justin Fields, that mobility with two stud running backs behind you will open up the passing games. They just need the studs in the receiving game. And I do like Darnell Mooney. Hasn't translated this year. We've seen it in the most recent years. Fair. But the mobility is such an advantage. I always remember this stat one. Vince Young and Kerry Collins were taking reps for the Titans, and Chris Johnson's running crazy. Games that VY was under center and that mobility was out there, Chris Johnson averaged 30 more yards a game. So that's something that return is going to come in Chicago, and it's already coming in Baltimore. Rashad Bateman, his value is just going to go up week after week.
No, I love that offense. I know too, because Greg Roman's offense always just funnels to the tight end. It's not a Lamar Jackson thing. It's just the way that offense is run. And we saw it in San Francisco and everything like that. So that's why during the preseason, when I was talking about Likely, people are like, well, he's a backup tight end. I'm like, yeah, but like a backup tight end in Baltimore is like the wide receiver too, and like on a different team. So it's like, it's worth having him. Like, you're not starting him. No, but he's good. He's good to be rostered. And I think that, and listen, I don't know how you feel about this because I'm not giving up on this guy. Everybody's freaking out about Kyle Pitts. But I think that number one, he went up against New Orleans week 1. New Orleans has handled him in all 3 games he's played against them. New Orleans doesn't allow him to do anything. Last week, he was going up against the Los Angeles Rams, and they decided to put Jalen Ramsey on him.
Right.
How do you feel about Kyle Pitts? Like, do you think that he can, rebound? Because I know a lot of people invested a lot of draft capital in him.
With the ability to move, line up at wide receiver, tight end, shift them into favorable matchups, that he's going to get value. The problem is he's limited by Mariota. Yeah. I mean, you don't have a true stand in the pocket, go through your progressions, hit the guy, get him the ball no matter what, think it out. Let's go back to it. The mobility side of it. You've got a wide receiver, return man, running back in Cordero Patterson. I mean, they're going for matchup problems. With Mariota, they know they don't have a ton of receiving options, so they're going with making the defense rock back and forth on their heels and the toes. That we're going backwards, we're going forward, and that's what you have with Mariota and Cordero Patterson. But it'll only get you so far, and Mariota's just not an efficient passer and taking advantage of small windows. And with the matchups you talked about in the first couple weeks for Kyle Pitts, we're talking about minimal windows that Mariota has to make those dime type throws in, and that's not his game. You give him some zone looks, let him open up 3 to 5 yard windows, let him pop it in there. You'll play to his strength. But at this point, the limitations in the quarterback play.
I just want to know how on God's green earth Arthur Smith finds a way to scheme open Delaney Walker,
nice,
Jonnu Smith. All these guys, said. And you've got a 6'6" freak. Figure it out. That's all I'm asking.
What's his wingspan? Like 7 foot? I mean, I think he's like
12 feet. No.
Yes. So maybe
it's
off an
insane.
inch or two, right?
Whatever. But how because that's the whole thing. Like Delaney Walker had some of his best seasons with Marcus
100%.
Mariota. So I'm like, oh, this is a slam dunk. And then you've got a unicorn. It's going to be amazing. And it hasn't worked out. And people are angry. But listen, since I know your expertise lies in the wide receivers. I want to talk about some wide receivers. I mentioned them a moment ago. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I mentioned it in my head. But CeeDee Lamb is another guy. Oh, I was talking about when you're talking about underdog. CeeDee Lamb has been frustrating. And I got caught up in following. I'm going to blame Matt Harmon of Yahoo Sports for leading me down. I'll blame Harmon like all the time. But, oh, man, I wanted to resist CeeDee Lamb. I bought in a couple of places. I've had him in like some dynasty and some keeper leagues. Sure. Is this ever going to turn around? I know the targets are there already, and it's not producing. Is it ever going to turn around? Is CeeDee Lamb going to be a legitimate number one wide receiver at any point?
If you ask for the season, I'll say 100%. But where we're at right now, we were talking about the stat, completion percent minus expected completion percent. The only two guys worse than Justin Fields and Davis Mills this season are Trey Lance and Dak Prescott. And it surprised me with Dak Prescott, but I was like, wow, so he was really missing that. And you go back and look at CeeDee Lamb the first week, what do you have, a couple receptions on like 11 targets?
11 targets.
2 receptions, 11 targets, if I'm not mistaken. And then you come back this week and it's more efficient. So whatever it is, rushing, get them the ball. There will be PPR value. But if we're talking about like a DraftKings or FanDuel or whoever main slate, you're looking at that price bracket here. I wrote it down for an article yesterday. That price bracket for wide receivers where CeeDee's coming in at, I mean, you've got Pittman at 6,900. If he's healthy this week, Matt Ryan's going to throw him 20 targets. Waddle's the number one. They got 2 number ones in Miami. They're going to take 60-70% of the targets. Mike Williams at 6,700. Waddle 6,800. Pittman 6,900. CeeDee 6,600. You can't pull that trigger. Mike Williams showed you he's a true number one when Keenan's out of the lineup. He's going to get you the touchdown production with Herbert if he's even 70-80% of himself. All those other guys, the value is so much higher in that tier. So he kills your value because I don't think the touchdowns are there.
Yeah, that was one of the things. I had to trade him this week for James Robinson. I needed an RB2. I have a team that has Justin Jefferson and Rashad Bateman, and I'm like, I'm going to make this move. And if CeeDee blows up, so be it. But it's like I can't go through the heartache every week with him.
I'm still on ETN. Now, Adam, I love your expertise. So if you don't mind, let me pick your brain on this. ETN, Trevor Lawrence, obviously we know about the chemistry at Clemson and everything. This guy, every game at Clemson, I'm a Clemson fan. I grew up a Clemson fan. Let me just pull that back. It's the only team I really still pull for. I don't have allegiance anywhere else. But Clemson, I love them. And I watched every snap they took. Every game, if you gave ETN the workload, there's a 40-plus yard play coming. Week one, I think he had like 4 carries. 1 went for 27 yards. He had like 2 receptions. 1 went for 23 yards. These are 20-plus yard plays. Now, everyone's like James Robinson. He had a good game, but almost 50% of that production came on 1 run last week. You take away that 1 massive run, 30, almost 40 yards, and him and ETN are both right there in that 2 to 3 yards of carry range. The running game's struggling there, but the fact that Robinson has value is that he's getting those short yardage, goal line carries and everything else. And Lawrence was one of a few quarterbacks to throw 600-plus passes last year. So there's the efficiency there.
By the way, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, comment sick. If you're listening on audio, please leave a 5-star review and write sick as well. It helps us out. And it allows us to continue to put out great content like this, have great guests like Jason in as well. So we really appreciate that, everybody who's listening and watching and continuing on through this after party. Now, you talked about, it's interesting to talk about Jacksonville because I think that James Robinson's value does come from the volume. I love Travis Etienne as well, and I would be buying him if I could. I think people are still holding on to him because what I saw in week 1 is that he dropped a touchdown pass. That happens. Trevor Lawrence missed him on another one. So you look at the usage, you're like, okay, he's on the cusp of being really good. I just really think that the way that the Jags are broken down is that, number one, Christian Kirk is their number one wide receiver.
Absolutely.
They're making a mistake. all of us who thought that Evan Ingram was going to be a thing, like that might not work out because I think they really like both running backs. And as we see, we look around the league, we see what the Packers are doing. We see what the Broncos are doing. We see what eventually the Bears will probably be doing. Even Houston's doing it a little bit with Damien Pierce and Rex Burkhead. These teams just run two running backs. Like it's very difficult to find those situations where it's a singular running back and he's going to get all the carries. Both those guys, James Robinson and Etienne, have capabilities to be very productive. So I really like that. So, I'm comfortable with James Robinson. I mean, he did have that big run. I mean, that's the thing that we talk about. But I think it's with both players because, like, Etienne has not been we're expecting him to pop up.
That's
I think
fair.
both these guys have big playability. That's why I would take a risk. I'm probably going to take a bath. I'm going to look like an idiot, which is fine. But I had to make a move. I had to get rid of CeeDee Lamb. Plus, I had Dalton Schultz. Sometimes when you go through drafts and you're not thinking, you're like, oh my God, did I just double up CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz? And I was on the air. That's why it was happening.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, that when you're trying, we did a draft at drroto.com where me and Jonathan Danger Cole, we were hosting while we were drafting. I don't think, unless you've done it, it's one of the more difficult things because you're keeping the conversation going. You're playing your part at the same time. You're looking at your board and you're like, okay, I know who I want. And then that guy, whoever it may be, gets taken while you're over here doing this. And you're like, all right, let me go select him. And you don't even realize he just got took a pick or two before. So it's a lot of balls up in the air. And drafting, you have to kind of play chess with it, with your roster building anyway. So it's a lot to do while you're broadcasting live.
No, 100%. And so I lost out on that one. But let's talk about some wide. I don't want you to give away everything that you're going to give. I want everybody to go out and read your story. And by the time this is released, hopefully your article will be up on drroto.com. Who's the guy we should be looking at wide receiver wise this week? Who's going to pop off?
I'm going to break down the wide receiver cornerback. We got a wide receiver cornerback tool over there. It shows where they're taking the reps, who they're matchup percent, all of that as well. I'll break that down, write that up a little bit later today. But what I did write earlier in this week is I took guys basically by tiers and told you in each tiers, which was the guy, like guys that I liked in those tiers, but who's the one that if you're going to go with one, you're going to pull the trigger, who's it going to be? And let's start with that top tier. You got Cooper Kupp, 9,900. He's getting 14 to 15 targets every week, but you're going to pay a premium for it. You've got Devontae Adams, $1,500 left at 8,400. Justin Jefferson, 9,300. Chase, 100, like all of those guys. But if you're going to say, all right, I'm spinning up on one, who you're going with, I'm taking the discount of Devontae Adams, 900 under Justin Jefferson and 1,500 under Cooper Kupp. And a lot of the reason why we know Renfro went in concussion protocol towards the end of that game. So if he's not 100%, if they're not targeting him as much, the uptick's going to be there for Waller and Devontae Adams, who we saw had 17 targets week one. The Titans defense, both of these teams are 0-2, and the Titans don't surprise me. The Raiders surprise me, them being 0-2. This is a better team than that on both sides of the ball. I think they really start to click. The chemistry's there from Fresno State with Carr and Adams. And at a $1,500 discount of Kupp, he's already got 17 targets week one. Last week, people were going to be down on him, like, well, what do you have? 2 catches, 7 targets, or whatever it was. So they're going to be down, not want to pay off. Zig where they zag. That's what I like to do. If it makes sense, don't do it just to do it. But here it makes sense because the Titans, they've got one really talented corner in Kristen Fulton. Didn't play last week, injured, limited, I think, yesterday in practice. Then you've got other guys like Caleb Farley. They don't have the DBs to hold Devontae Adams for longer than a second. And so I think Devontae Adams' workload is going to be heavy this week, and I'm taking the discount, and in that tier, I'm going Devontae Adams. I like the matchup a lot.
All right. And listen, if you want the rest of this great information, you got to go to the website. We can't make you give it away all here, but I love Devontae Adams this week as well. It's interesting with the Raiders and the Titans. This is the third time in NFL history that two teams who made the playoffs have met in week 3, both teams being 0-2.
Wow.
And the road team has won both contests.
Oh, that's
not
a great
that it matters.
No, that's a great nugget, though. You've got to drop that. I didn't even know that. That's a great nugget.
But the little things that we do right there is, but listen, we're going to let you go. I want to thank you so much for being here and being a part of the show. And it's a lot of fun, as you can see right there. You can follow him on Twitter at Jason with the Y, Jason Braddock, and follow all of his great work. If you're a fan of Houston football, or if you're a fan of fantasy football, he is somebody you should be following. And thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thank you guys for sharing the airwaves and sending out the invitation. I appreciate it. It was a joy. Enjoy the game Sunday.
Yeah, the pleasure was all ours. Thanks, and maybe we'll do it. If you want to come back to the island, you have an open invitation. That's an open-ended ticket. So anytime you want to join us again, just let us know.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime, reach out. Let me know. I'm here. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Adam. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Jason. It was a blast. There he goes. The great Jason Braddock. What a great, a twofer of Rank's rivals that transitioned into Fantasy Island. Sammy is doing great work booking this show, and I want to thank everybody for being a part of the program today. And this is going to be an interesting time for the Chicago Bears. Like, this is the one. This is where we will allow you to be a little panicky if things don't work in our direction. But again, like, this is a good team. Like, we're not going up against a slouch. We're going up against a team that's very formidable, but we can rattle Davis Mills. We can get to him. We have the defense to do it. And I think that Matt Eberflus has coached against this Houston Texans team quite a lot. So this is a very familiar foe. Yeah, I know you think about playing the Green Bay Packers and you're like, there's a lot of familiarity. To the fans, there is. To Matt Eberflus, this is a game where all the familiarity is on his side. He knows this team. He's studied against this team twice a year for the last 4 years. So this is the game where we should go out there and expect the Bears to really go out there, have a great game plan, really limit the Texans, and of course, offensively, hopefully start getting back on track, because we're too good. There's too many good players for it to look like it looked on Sunday night. Now, I want to thank all of our sponsors once again. Underdog Fantasy, really appreciate them coming aboard. Again, download the app, use the code SICK. If you need an air purifier, Air Pura is there for you to protect your family. And of course, if you're in the Southern California area, Rip Beer Company is the place to be on Sunday morning. We'll be watching the Bears game there. I will be a half hour late. I will be doing the fantasy show on the whatever app they put it on. I don't even know. Like, we do a fantasy show. They're like, hey, you got to do this show. Like, where is it? Is it on the Red Zone? No. Is it on the network? No. But I don't know. We do a show. And apparently it was very important for me to be there this week. So in any event, after that show, I will be at Rip Beer Company, hopefully to see a Bears victory. So for everybody here, for Mark, for Jason, and of course, our great staff here at Sick Media, Sammy, thank you so much for everything. Let's go get a win this week. Bear down, and go ahead and play us out.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Adam Rank on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. Brought to you by Underdog Fantasy and Air Pura.